For those who have just joined, hi everyone, I'm Kritika from Connect4 with my colleague Aarti. Aarti, do you want to say hi? Okay, I don't think she's audible. Anyways, thank you all for being here. I do see some, in fact, I see many Connect4 partners here today and some non-partner NGOs. For those of you who have not partnered with Connect4, Connect4 is essentially an online volunteering platform where we match and connect volunteers with NGOs to fulfill the needs that NGOs essentially have. While the concept of monetary donation is very well established in India, we focus on empowering people to donate their time and their skill. So we've partnered with approximately 400 plus NGOs and have more than 18,000 volunteers on our platform. And we operate across like India. Our services are entirely free and we have a very simple registration procedure. So whoever is interested in registering and partnering with us, please do join Connect4 and the form will be in the chat box. At the outset, I would love to thank all of you all from the bottom of my heart for like all the resilience, perseverance and passion all of you all have displayed towards ensuring, you know, just the safety and welfare of your beneficiaries as well as their families. And your work and your ways of innovating and shifting gears in these unprecedented times, and even otherwise, not just right now, is actually an inspiration to all of us. And that's why we've brought you all together here today to hear more about it. A special thanks actually to all our panelists today who generously agreed to share their insights and experiences and especially their time with us. I'm sure it'll be a wealth of information and best practices that we take away from today, which we can fit into our own context and into our own work. Our panelists are actually pioneers in this space, and it's an immense pleasure for me to introduce all of you to them. So we have Deepthi Gabbi from Jaivatil Foundation, who heads the education program there. We have Divyanshu Ganatra, who is the founder of Adventure Beyond Barriers and who is like a hydroponics enthusiast, as I recently found out. We have Gitanjali Gaur, who heads operations at MAN. And we have Deepthi Sawant from Ray Foundation, who works on Ray Foundation's marketing and advocacy piece. The panelists present here essentially work with disabilities, with people with disabilities across education, livelihoods, inclusion, and adventure sports. So it's actually quite a mix in order to make sure that every area is sort of represented. While everyone's voice in the space definitely does count, and we would love to hear everyone's like opinion, but obviously we have like time constraints. So we've chosen these four NGOs to lead the discussion just to abate any sort of, you know, chaos that comes with multiple people speaking on tech platforms and overlapping points and all of that. So the aim today is actually to learn more about these organizations, strategies, the work done so far, the challenges, the potential solutions that, you know, we can come up with together, like just the way Farida and Aditi sort of collaborated right now and decided to take it offline. That's actually what we're aiming for and hoping for as a result of today's roundtable session. So we will be opening the floor to questions and thoughts towards the end of the discussion. So until then, if we can just stick to like the flow and the panelists, that would be great. Now you all know the reason we are here today is because of the pandemic and the aftermath of the lockdown. So while the lockdown is a new experience for people who are not differently able, what I've understood is that for those who are like specially abled or have disabilities, it's only sort of aggravated their existing issues. So they have sort of been further marginalized as other issues have obviously taken precedence over the issues that people with disabilities face. So in the situation of the pandemic, those who are reliant on caregivers face more challenges as sort of maintaining, you know, physical distance becomes unfeasible, and even like maintaining safety protocols is not something that can be done. Furthermore, like I'm assuming that the usual therapy sessions as well for like your motor skills, your speech therapy, etc., cannot be continued at the level that it previously was being carried out on. There are also several other dimensions to these issues, as I've read from like general newspaper articles. So there was a report that came out wherein a father had to kill his 45-year-old differently able son in Kolkata because the father was unable to convince his son to not leave the house without wearing a mask. So yeah, those are like the dark sides of the entire pandemic situation so far. However, pre-COVID things were slightly different and they looked good. So I will be playing a short video now by the work done by Jai Vakil Foundation and MAN before we deep dive into this talk to get a sense of what things were like before COVID hit us. And hopefully these two videos will sort of uplift everyone's spirits, right? So I'm just going to present right now. Bear with me if there are any tech errors that we face. Just give me a second, please. So I'm going to be playing this video first. Let me know if you all can see the screen.
Yeah, Kritika, we can.
Yeah, you can.
Yes.
Is the audio? Can you hear the audio?
Yes. Yeah, we can.
With 100 being a normal IQ and 70 being children with intellectual disability, children who have IQs of 30 and below usually have severe to profound intellectual disability.
People say group that is highly misunderstood.
लोग हमारे बच्चों को दया की नजर से देखते हैं.
लोग ऐसे बच्चों को एक्सेप्ट नहीं करते हैं और उनके पास जाने के लिए झिझकते हैं. People see my sister as a nuisance and they want us to leave from the society.
ऑनलाइन होने की वजह से ऐसे बच्चों से लोग बहुत डरते हैं.
लोग मेरे बेटे को देखते हैं तो समझ में नहीं आता है. इससे मुझे ये बात समझ में आता है कि ये पागल है, नहीं कुछ.
लोग उनके बच्चों को इनके साथ सब नहीं करना चाहते हैं.
ये बच्चे सभी के ऊपर बोझ है. I see a smile which brightens our day.
ये बच्चे हिम्मत नहीं हारते हैं.
मैं देखती हूँ कि ईश्वर को आजू-बाजू के लोगों में मेरा बहुत अच्छा लगता है. I see my sister with someone who has been conditioned. मैं देखती हूँ कि मुझे मेरे तीनों बच्चों में कोई फर्क नहीं. तीनों बच्चे मेरे एक समान हैं. जब मैं देखती हूँ आंखों में देखती हूँ उसके आगे बहुत सारे एक्सप्रेशंस हैं, फीलिंग्स हैं.
हर एक बच्चे में अलग-अलग एबिलिटी होती है.
अगर समाज के प्रवाह में उनको रहना है, उनके आगे बढ़ाना है, तो हमको उनको अपना ही दर्जा देना पड़ेगा. ये मैं देखता हूँ.
As part of having a low IQ, many of these children have behavior issues, they respond to situations differently, and some of them may even look different. If you do come across a child with severe intellectual disability and his behavior is not appropriate for his age, do remember it's because of his intellectual quotient. However, he has every right to be loved, included, and accepted in our society, just like you and me.
Hello, Kritika, you're on mute. Hello. You're on mute.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So we have one more video to share. I'll just play it. That was a really heartwarming video, actually, and I have a few experiences to share from my interactions with someone who was specially able. It was one of the most memorable interactions I've had. Just gonna play this. Aarti, can you see it and hear it?
Hi, I'm Beverly. I'm one of the co-founders of MUN. Here's a message for you from our trainees.
I am from MUN. I have been trained here so that I can work in areas like
Housekeeping.
Food and beverage services.
Hello.
Table setting.
Labeling and packaging. I have also been trained here. At MUN, I can work at our center to make different gifts and help fulfill orders.
And be the back. Please support us and spread the word.
Hi, it's me again. Learn more about MUN here.
Krutika, you're on
Hi,
mute.
I'm Beverly Lewis and I'm one of the founder trustees.
Yeah, sorry about that. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay,
Guys,
so those.
one minute. If anyone is facing any network issues or something, you can just switch off your cameras. It will provide bandwidth to the speakers then. Yeah. Krutika, okay, you can go ahead.
Okay. So those videos were actually extremely heartwarming, and playing them sort of helps sets the tone and expectation of this round table, which is essentially related to cross learnings. So the goal for the participants today is to learn from each other's work so far within the context of COVID-19 and otherwise. If there is something that has worked really well for you, for your organization, please do share it. Any sort of suggestions on the innovations and pilot projects undertaken by your NGO would be greatly appreciated if you could, share it on this call. I'm sure that there are some common challenges that all you NGOs face out here, and airing them would also help us come up with solutions today. Further, it might be helpful to even use this platform to sort of explore potential partnerships and collaborations on resources, projects, tools, processes, systems that can benefit your students and staff. So feel free to even exchange numbers on here and get in touch with each other offline. Last but not the least, we just hope that you sort of get a sense of solidarity, that many of y'all are working towards the same challenges and solutions towards them, and that nobody is alone in these times when we feel really overburdened and understaffed. So I will quickly be sharing the community discussion guidelines with you. Just make sure that y'all are on mute. Participants, if y'all would like to sort of introduce yourselves in the group chat right now while I go over this, it would be really helpful. So essentially, just please actively listen, participate, and create a space for others to speak and talk. Please make sure that y'all are on mute again and y'all are not presenting. If you would like to contribute, you can sort of let us know in the chat box in the right hand corner, and I will unmute you after all the components have been addressed by the panelists. Just please keep to the point and stick to the allotted time frame of about a minute per person for the participants. And if you have any questions, type them in the chat. We will try to address them at the end of the entire session. If they are unanswered, then we'll try to get them to you. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. So the key questions that we've essentially come up with right now fall under broader topics which help us understand the kind of ground realities that your beneficiaries, your staff face, and the manner in which you are sort of re-strategizing your programs for online, offline support, and the various ways you all are sort of even retaining your beneficiaries right now, and what kind of major resources have worked well for your NGOs. So Gitanjali, I would love to direct this question to you around the on-ground realities that your staff and your beneficiaries are facing at MUN. So can you tell us a little about the kind of support that is needed right now, and how do people with disabilities even get it?
Thank you, Krutika. Good evening, everybody.
I'm Gitanjali Gaur, co-founder at MAN Center for Individuals with Special Needs. So as Kritika said that we basically work with adults, they're all 18 and above, and the primary aim is to make sure that they have gainful employment. That is what MAN does in a nutshell. And since most of the beneficiaries come from the marginalized communities, so I think the first support that was required was the basic monetary support to ensure that they are able to do anything else beyond, because if they are not able to feed this person with disabilities, and I think getting to training and other aspects of it would not really make sense, because putting food on the table when the COVID crisis struck them was the primary need of the hour. So that was the first and most important thing that we kind of made sure that we avail to them. And of course, after that, the next thing is, now what do you do with this person with special needs? Because the parents are so used to sending them to probably a center or a school where they actually are not involved one-on-one dealing with this person with disability. So that was like a culture shock that came to the parents, that what am I supposed to do with them and how do I do it? So these are two very, very important aspects. And so yes, the next thing that we did was go online, make sure that we ensure that all of them have something structured to do through the day, and the parents know exactly what to do with them. But obviously, to go online, the first and most important thing is the infrastructure. Not everyone has a phone at home, not everyone has a laptop at home, not everyone has internet access at home. So, and even if they do, then they may not know how to use it to the fullest. So A, provide the tech support, B, train them, give that digital literacy so that they are able to use what you are providing. Only then it's going to be meaningful and useful to them. So that was the next aspect. And yes, at the end, after all of this has been done, to cope with it, to actually work with your child one-on-one, which you have never really done, dealt with them all 24 hours of your life. At least now it's eased out. So yes, you can, there's a breather where you can probably go out, do a little bit of walking, some physical activity. But the initial phase of the lockdowns and the size of homes that a lot of our students come from, there is not enough space to even walk 10 steps, 20 steps in the house. So what do you do with this person? That led to a lot of emotional drain out, a lot of mental health issues started cropping up, a lot of frustration. How do you deal with this person with disability and yourself? So a lot of mental health support to cope with it. So yeah, this is the combo that we kind of worked, and that was the support that really worked in our case.
Okay, so essentially most of the MAN's beneficiaries do live with guardians and parents who are sort of well acquainted with the kind of care that they need to give to their ward or their child, right?
So yes, so since MAN doesn't really provide a residential setup and it's a daycare thing, so hence all of them go back home. So they are very well acquainted with the person with disability that is in the house, but not all of them are equipped with skills to actually keep them meaningfully occupied. So that was the key challenge when COVID hit us. That what do you do with this person at home 24/7?
Of course. So there might be a lot of like parental support, and even like upskilling the parents to have them way more equipped to deal with their child at home now. Is that something that you're currently looking into as well?
Yes, Kritika. So we do look into providing tutorial videos to the parents. Entire schedule is sent with the list of activities, and then giving them additional help with audio visuals which they can actually comprehend and understand. And it is in languages that they can actually follow at home, because not all parents follow English. So, just doing exercise and just picking a YouTube video will not help, because that is not meaningful to them. It has to be something that they can relate to and is to meet the needs of this specific individual. So yeah, it has to be very person specific in that case. Yeah.
Of course. So those are obviously gaps in the system, but currently are there any gaps in the system that are preventing people like with disabilities from continuing with their life as normal in this context and even beyond it?
Yeah. So I think exclusion and isolation of a person with disability has always been there. be it pre-COVID or during the COVID time, because I don't think they are actually a part of mainstream society just as any of us are. I think we even saw the video where it clearly states that how a lot of people are unaware what is to be done with a person. They don't know how do you interact with them and things like that. So hence they've always been marginalized at that end. And I think, in fact, COVID has helped us understand and live in their shoes for a while, because we have been at home and we have been doing things at home, which many a times a lot of people with disabilities, this is their life, they are kept indoors. So I think honestly it has taught us, we claim that, okay, we are regular people or with people with normal intelligence and things like that. But I think this was a great learning for all of us. And if all businesses have learned how to work from home, then I think why not for the disabled? Because I mean, for people with disabilities, all the more, if we provide a job opportunity at home and they're able to do it successfully, there you go. I think that's a very workable model. So I think the future, in fact, seems brighter for the disabled for me.
Wow, that's so lovely to hear, actually. So yeah, thanks for that. Deepti, Guppy, would you like to take us and walk us through like the kind of on-ground realities that your beneficiaries from Jai Vakil Foundation are kind of dealing with?
Sure. Hi, good evening to everybody. And I'm Deepti Gubbi. I head education at Jai Vakil Foundation. It is an organization that works for children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So our response to COVID actually has been split into 3 phases. Like Gitanjali very well mentioned, the first thing that we dealt with was the well-being of our children. It was so unprecedented. None of us knew. I mean, even us, we were finding it difficult to sort of understand what was happening. And it was that much more magnified for children with disability, because they weren't being able to make sense of why suddenly school is shut, why suddenly their routine has come to a stop. And there are so many, do's and don'ts that are being put on them. And for them to understand and make sense of this was completely difficult. So our first exercise was to ensure, like Gitanjali said, that there was groceries were at home, medical care was taken care of, and also the emotional well-being of not only the child, but also the parent, because the parent wasn't used to having the child at home throughout. And what they were dealing with their own apprehensions and vulnerability regarding their children, because our kids come with comorbidities. So that fear, of course, is there with the parents. So that anxiety, and also the situation at homes may or may not have been very good. So their own issues about their own financial stability was in question. So our endeavor was, so our teachers made over 4,500 calls to students over a period of 10 weeks. The primary reason for that was to ensure that their family was safe and they were taken care of. That was our first phase. And that happened in March. In April, we realized, when things had settled down a little bit and we had given a lot of support to our families, we reconvened and we thought that what is it that we can do for our students, considering that they're on a summer break and we don't want to take online classes just as yet. So what is it that we can do to help them out? So we brainstormed with a cross-section of our parents and tried to understand with them what were the challenges they were facing. One of the key things that stood out was they were struggling to put a structure in place for their children. They did not know how to set a routine in place. Having that being the main theme that came out from most of the parents, Jai Vakil's team, the special educators and the therapists, decided to start a YouTube channel wherein we made playlists in 13 different domains, which is assembly, yoga, dance, activities of daily living, academics, functional skills. The idea being that we wanted to keep faces familiar, because these were difficult times. So many new things were happening. We wanted the students' teachers to come and address them. So the videos were all made in-house. The intention and the endeavor was to keep the videos applicable to all our students, so across the spectrum. So if we did make a yoga video, we wanted to ensure that the child who's mildly intellectually disabled could use it, but made a variation of it for children who were profoundly challenged also. So we put that in place, and as we speak, we have over 150 videos in the YouTube channel. Once the whole library was set up, we realized that sometimes it could be very overwhelming for the parent to get this plethora of information, and they may or may not be able to use this effectively. So the next exercise actually was to tailor make a plan for each of the students, keeping in mind the available resources that we had. So like you said that, space was a crunch. There might be too many people in the house. Mother may have to look after the whole family and the meals in the morning. How do we structure the day? So we individually with every student made a pattern, made a plan so that the children were gainfully engaged at that time. That happened in the month of April. While we were doing this structuring of the day for the students, our team started to discuss and plan as to how things would happen once the school reopened in June. That's when we did a whole tech analysis of what is the availability of resources with parents as well as our teachers. How much training would it need? What is it that we would need to keep ready on our end and have the whole plan ready and set up before the children came back in June? The way we've gone about doing that is we have a blended model of learning, which has both synchronous and asynchronous components. We have live sessions for 1.5 hours a day for each of our students. How we've thought about the three things that we kept in mind while planning this whole delivery design was that we very well knew that we wanted to keep the familiarity of the teacher. So we did not move any classes this year. So typically in June, when the next academic session starts, you are supposed to move children to various classes. We did not do that on purpose because we wanted to keep the familiarity of the teacher as well as the comfort level of the parent with the teacher. So consciously, we decided not to move any of the classes. The second very important thing that we thought was that we are going to ensure that we don't have learning lags. So instead of focusing on new content teaching on this very new platform for both students and teachers, we are going to ensure that we are going to recap and focus on things that are already learned and ensure that there is less regression and learning gaps versus new material. And the third thing was we made parents our partners, and we had very honest conversations with them in terms of explaining what expectations they can have from us in terms of this new platform and what is it that we would be expecting of them. So right at up front, I think that discussion really helped, and these classes then started. The way they are structured is that we wanted to ensure that the child experienced exactly what they would at school. So whether it was academics or functional activities and co-curricular, the idea was to design it in such a way that it gave a semblance of a regular school day. So we have about an hour and a half of classes depending on the age and the ability of the child. And in that we have 45 minutes of academic or functional classes and 45 minutes of co-curricular classes. And that is a platform at which, in fact, we can talk later also, where we are getting volunteers to come and work with our students also. So we have a lot of schools who are, through their CIP programs, volunteering with our students, even on an online platform. So that's something that we decided. Other than that, the way the delivery channel is such that the platform for virtual learning is Zoom. So the live classes happen on Zoom, after which what we do is that we ensure that we send some supplementary material to the parent that is regarding what has been taught in class. So there is supplementary material that goes in. There is a homework component, which is about twice a week we give in homework on WhatsApp, and it is returned to the teacher on WhatsApp again. And another important thing that we do is we touch base with the parent every once in a week. So every week, the parent gets a call from the teacher to understand if things are going well, if they have any suggestions, and if there is a problem, how do we deal with it? That is the platform that we are following. And In this world, monitoring is important. So how is it? So we have an entire MIS wherein we track student attendance, teacher attendance, student response. If the student response on a particular week has not been good, we brainstorm as to what worked, what didn't, what is it that we can bring in so that the response is higher. And for all of this to happen, there was immense amount of training that happened for all stakeholders. So we have students who didn't have support in terms of have the gadget at home. So we provided those children who did not have the gadget. We gave data recharges to all our students and also dongles to all our teachers to conduct this online platform. Other than that, there was so parents even did not even know. There were parents who held a smartphone for the first time in their lives. So, so the training from how to handle a smartphone to how to download Zoom to how to connect to a class. What do you do if, you get disconnected? We have lovely stories of how parents have felt totally empowered. And we are in our 8th week of online training. Lots of challenges, lots of learnings, but it has been quite a exciting journey. And we are very happy that we are able to keep that connect with our students and ensure. So our project is called Project ACE, and we believe that ghar se padhenge, aage badhenge. So that's our motto. We are ensuring that we keep our children safe and keep them learning and are available for anything that they might face in these unprecedented times.
Wow, Deepti, honestly, more power to you. It's just really lovely to hear how you all have recreated and reimagined learning for these times and fitted it in so beautifully to meet the requirements of not just the students but the caregivers as well. And I definitely do see parallels that run across education for specially able as well as for just the normally able, I guess. I'm sorry, I don't know the terminology for that. But it would be great if we could get Divyanshu from Adventures Beyond Barriers to share his experience with the on-ground realities now.
Right. Hi, Yutika, and hello, everybody. My name is Divyanshu, and I am the founder of Adventures Beyond Barriers. We have been focusing more on inclusion for persons with disability, and we work with cross disability. And the way we do it is largely through outdoor and adventure sports and creating experiences, because we believe that this is the largest invisible minority population in the world, and most people are not aware of how to deal with persons with disability. They are not aware of what to do, anything. They've never even met a person with disability, let alone getting to know somebody. And we believe that the only way we can really change this world, make a difference, is by these experiences that people have while playing together. And through that, the outcome is that there are changes in the education sector, there are changes in the livelihood and employment, there have been changes in creating accessible infrastructure. So there are lots of social change that happens as a result of people's engagement with one another. We largely work with corporates because we believe there's a business case. Now, what are the challenges that really we are facing with after COVID is, number one, most of our experiences are physical. Most of them are engagement, personal experiences of playing together. So it's not a format that is suitable for online, immediate, you can't translate it to online. Online experiences don't make that much of a difference. We believe in the actual physical connections. Hence, our operations are suspended. But just to compare pre-COVID and during COVID, what are we doing? So one of the things we know pre-COVID is that 75% of children with disability were anyways out of education, even pre-COVID. And I shudder to think what has happened now, post-COVID. We don't have data, but it definitely is not a good scene. We've also seen that pre-COVID, people with disability were extremely marginalized and vulnerable, and they have been even more marginalized and become vulnerable now, with no conversations happening in the larger world outside. While I know the migrant population issue is a huge issue and a realistic issue, the issue of persons with disability is even worse because nobody's even talking about it. That's how difficult the situation is. We've had people with disability losing their livelihood, not knowing whether they'll go back to those livelihoods again. So livelihood has taken a huge impact. So that's the current reality. As of now, we have difficulty in greater isolation, exclusion, while everybody touts WFH as the panacea. As a person with disability, I can tell you that it is not necessarily a panacea or a solution for all concerned. For example, I'm blind and WFH does not necessarily work for me. Like the videos that were just shared, the screen that gets shared during work meetings are not accessible. These platforms are not entirely accessible to the hearing impaired. So already I'm facing a lot of exclusion, even in my workspaces. So a lot of people with disability whom we know don't have the infrastructure or the spaces to work from home. They're like 6-7 people in a 10 by 10 room or a shanty and can't work from home. They don't have the privacy and the infrastructure. So while WFH is a good solution for some, it's not a panacea for persons with disability. It's not actually a solution that fits everybody, and we need to recognize that. Just the fact that I'm even more isolated, even more excluded, and with the health concerns, people with disability have died at twice the rate due to COVID than any other population, largely because I can't help but touch surfaces. There is no option for me but to touch surfaces. I have people who have extreme malnutrition, which also results in being immunocompromised, and those are the issues that that are for real on the ground. And lastly, what in the larger context, what we have also seen is a lot of funding has dried up for almost 60% of NGOs. Their runway will end in another 3 to 4 months, and most of their projects have been now skimmed and barely functional, just to stay afloat and to stay relevant. A lot of NGOs are doing something, but it's really just to stay relevant and stay afloat because of the lack of funding. Pre-COVID, we had great traction when it came to employment. What we noticed during that time is that while we created a lot of demand for hiring of persons with disability, we couldn't meet up to the demand. And that's the surprising fact, that we couldn't meet up with the demand. There was no supply. People with disability, the education really needs to ramp up. We are far behind. And a lot of them are not employable. And having a degree, having a graduate degree also doesn't mean that you're employable. They're just not employable. They're just not corporate ready. They don't have the skills necessary to survive in the corporate world. And to me, that's the future that really is that we need to work on collectively as all NGOs. 2023, already AI has taken a huge leap right now in the past 4 months. 2023, 69% of managerial jobs will disappear. And I'm talking about able-bodied jobs. 69% of managerial jobs for able-bodied people or non-disabled people are going to disappear. I really shudder to think what will happen to people with disability just 2 years from now. A large number of our beneficiaries are working in hospitality and service industries, which have taken a huge hit. Most of them have come back and have no livelihood. We worked with 1,000 hawkers, blind hawkers from Wangani and Bombay area, who used to sell knickknacks on trains. They have lost their livelihood. We don't see their livelihood returning anytime soon, but neither can I work in getting them employed somewhere, because they don't have the skills or education required for them to be employed somewhere else. And that's the challenge with 80% of people with disability that needs to change. So we are also in the meantime setting up a technology platform to aid NGOs, people with disability, corporates, because one of the challenges we noticed pre-COVID, which we thought of addressing during this time, was there's no single portal for NGOs and corporates and business houses, PWDs, to get to know information, to get to know of opportunities. A lot of NGOs do not have access to corporates. A lot of corporates don't have access to PWDs or NGOs, and it's a absolutely disorganized sector. And what we're trying to do is use technology, use AI to make life easy for not just for persons with disability, but of course for NGOs who serve these beneficiaries and constituents, and to be able to pass on these opportunities to have a single window. So we should have that portal up and ready in about a month's time, where NGOs can then use these opportunities, also understand what is the need in the market. There's no point training somebody on A when the need for something is D in the market. So also to ramp up their trainings, also to ramp up their own capacities to be able to meet the future demands, the current and the future demands. We're also working on creating an accessible outdoor center for persons with disability and able-bodied people to come and engage together in a safe environment where they can go cycling, they can go climbing mountains, they can stay under the stars, but also get to learn about each other and go out there and make a difference. So we bought a piece of land about 50 kilometers from Pune where we are building this accessible center. That hopefully should be up and ready in a year's time from now. And third thing we're working on is while we are all touting education to go online for a lot of content being pushed out in the format of videos and online education, we fail to recognize that 40 million people in India are blind and about 20 million people in India are hearing impaired. That's about 60 to 70 million people for whom this content is inaccessible. And we are working, we already launched a service to make these video content accessible for visually impaired and blind audiences around the world, as well as for hearing and speech impaired audiences around the world, so that this content that we push out is made accessible. They can make sense of it. Like most video content is not accessible, most presentations are not accessible, and that's what we're trying to do, so that while education gets pushed online, it also is accessible. So currently, that's what we're busy with. We've launched some of these services, and of course, we're happy to partner with anybody who wants to ensure their education is inclusive, not just accessible, but really inclusive in every sense of the word.
So Divyanshu, we've actually got a unanimous sort of thing from like the participants. Everyone unanimously agrees with most of the points that you have raised. In fact, some of the comments that have come in right now, someone from Flying Fish, Tripti, says that it's great to know about the engagement center for specially abled and differently abled.
Right.
Dr. Ketna Mehta has mentioned that the idea of portal connecting NGOs of PWDs and corporates is excellent. And someone from Special World would love to have your contact number. So I will be sharing Divyanshu's contact number with you. If it's okay with you, Divyanshu?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Okay. My number is online and all my information is online. So I'm pretty open book out there. but it's interesting, isn't it, that there is no single place in this entire country where people with and without disability can enjoy the outdoors, can have a night under the stars, can go climbing walls, and doesn't matter if you're paraplegic, it doesn't matter if you're blind, doesn't matter if you're amputees, you can have the same fun. You can fly even if you're blind. And I believe that you can do this alongside everybody else, and there's no greater sense of engagement and inclusion when you just play together. But there is no such place that exists. There's no such portal that exists for information to be disseminated, and that's the big challenge. So I would love to collaborate with all of you and make this world more inclusive. For myself, of course, because I'm somebody with a disability.
And I think I'm definitely going to sign up for the next adventure sports camp that
I
you
can't
have.
wait. I can't wait. Unfortunately, everything's suspended, but I can't wait for all of you to join in all our engagements. And of course, all of these engagements are absolutely free.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, even more incentive to join. But so now, if we can get Deepti Sawant from Ray Foundation to share a little bit of her experience of like the on-ground realities at Ray Foundation, and talk a little about the work that Ray Foundation does. I think we're also running a little behind schedule, so if we can just like stick to the 2 minutes allotted to each speaker, that would be really helpful. Deepti?
Yeah. Hi, Kritika.
Hi.
Good evening to everyone present here. This is Deepti Sawant Shetty, and I work as a marketing and advocacy manager with Ray Foundation. Ray Foundation is a non-profit started by Mr. Amit Patni and Mrs. Ruchi Patni in 2015. And we predominantly work in the field of education, disability education, as well as rural development, women empowerment. Currently, we have a center in Lower Parel that caters to 48 differently abled children. By differently abled children, I mean a mix of children with learning disability, ASD, hearing, and vision impairment, all under one roof. What we try to cater at our center is give a complete holistic intervention in terms of special education as well as therapy. So coming to the question of the ground realities post-pandemic, I would like to deep dive directly into the biggest practical issue that we face right now is in terms of funding and monetary operating costs of running the center. What we saw is that with the onset of the pandemic as a surprise flung on all of us, it made sense to sit down and start with the cost cutting quite early. It is a wise practice to plan much ahead in the coming months because it is a very uncertain zone we all are in right now. So as much as all the other program elements are important, so is the monetary aspect of running a disability program. A disability program is expensive in terms of its operating costs, and that is the first thing which we reviewed and strategized on. And that's a ground reality most NGOs are facing right now with drying up of funds from the market and having to pitch in money from their pocket completely. So that makes sense if one could, start with the budgeting right on to plan ahead. The second challenge that we faced was suddenly having to adopt to a technological platform because the program that we were running was a completely on-ground program for the past 5 years. And the teaching methodology was one-on-one, where the teacher is physically present with the child in the absence of the parent. The parent base that you're looking at are people coming from low income communities with very less technological know-how. And now suddenly with the pandemic, without any proper preparation, you're flung into a zone where you have to start planning on using a technological medium. And that is where our biggest challenge started. A lot of our parents had migrated to their villages back home. For a span, they were not in communication. We had difficulty getting in touch with them. And that is the start of, the transition process that we had to face, where our team sat down and brainstormed on what can be done. So we started with first making the staff comfortable with using technology. What I see is technology is a huge monster in people's heads. They are scared of technology. They're scared of incorporating technology in their day-to-day lives. And that is the reticence which has stopped most of the NGO programs from effectively using technology. This is the reticence that we first trained our staff to overcome, that easily and very comfortably technology can become a part of our curriculum. once the staff were handheld and once the staff were trained to look at it differently, to look at the program implementation differently, what we did next was to get the parents on board, to make the parents comfortable with this new implementation method of a program, where we had to make them see that to use a phone to connect with the teacher. This is going to be a virtual implementation of the program. And slowly but eventually the parents also decided to give a proper participation in this new phase. So that is the second challenge we faced in terms of getting the parents to communicate with us first. And second is to use technology to now render education for their child. Once we had, a complete understanding of, having the teachers and the parents form a momentum in implementing this program, we could go to the next step of, designing a complete comprehensive MIS in terms of how we can monitor and track this program. Because what was essential was to dynamically react to it. There was no point in forming a concrete strategy if they were going to crop up new challenges. And we thought it was best to keep it a weekly review session where we are able to get information from the parents on weekly basis on what is happening. We were able to learn from our teachers' experiences in terms of what was happening. So this is something that we transitioned into for the pandemic. One. The second aspect of disability education that over the time of having running this program we realized was it is important to make these children vocation ready. What happens is when you see a special child, predominantly there are two kinds of reactions. Either there is huge empathy, huge sympathy, which leads to a complete pity mentality while looking at these children, or the second aspect is to completely isolate or stigmatize these children and treat them as a complete separate part of the society. What needs to be done, in my opinion, is that disability education, where we cater to from 0 to 18, has to also make the children vocation ready post 18. Every child has shown certain strengths in spite of their being their disability. You can see that there are certain strengths in terms of them being creative, in terms of them being good at sports. So there's certain strengths that every child has, and identification of those strengths and honing those skills to make them vocation ready and independent is what is can be a one way to look at disability education, according to me. So that is another challenge that we face, that yes, you have to impart special education, but how it can lead to a futuristic actionable goal. And that is what we tried to do in the last 2 months of having had the time to revisit our curriculum and redesign it. Apart from that, there are these basic challenges of parents not having access to good internet connection, or sometimes not having devices. As simple as sometimes having access to a device and WhatsApp, but being very reticent to use Zoom. And if volunteers could come in and take these smaller sessions to educate people to use simple things like Zoom, simple things like Google Meet, that's very much helpful for us to connect to a low income group of people. What is my understanding is, in spite of the fact that we are in a crisis mode, one learning that we have taken away is that yes, it is possible to remotely teach special children. Of course, not at the effectiveness that you would have on the ground, but definitely it is possible. And this opens up a huge scalable model with the help of technology that you can, access across the world. And a couple of, teachers could also create a huge impact. So that has been our key learning. Over to you, Nitika.
Yeah, Deepti, I think one thing that COVID has really taught us is that it's exposed so many strengths and so many opportunities that we never knew existed within us and even externally as well. And yeah, that nothing is set in stone and that you have to be agile and constantly be ahead of the curve and re-strategize programs and yeah, programs essentially. So this kind of takes us to the next component wherein we'd like for the panelists to sort of share with us the kind of resources that NGOs need financially and technologically and human resources wise to sort of re-strategize their existing programs for online or partial offline support. So I know that you brought in the point of volunteers plugging in the gaps that your staff couldn't sort of upskill parents as well as the beneficiaries. So Connect4 can definitely help in that sense because we have about 16,000, 18,000 volunteers who can come and work on different projects for y'all. But Gitanjali, if you could sort of walk us through the kind of resources that NGOs would need financially, technologically, and human resources wise, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, hi. With regard to the kind of resources that we would require, I think with the pandemic hitting us, financial resources is something that has been affected for the NGO sector. So let alone, the disability aspect of it. But yeah, because I think fundraising is going to be a challenge all through. And that is the most important thing for us to sustain. So yes, financial for sure. And even to make sure that we are able to provide to the families with the financial resources that they require, that we have been doing since the month of March. That would also be another resource that we would need. Also making sure that the gadgets are being provided, because it's not like we know for sure that yes, in so and so month we are going to be able to get back to usual business and get things going just as we were. It's going to take a while by the time we actually get to operations at the center as we were doing pre-COVID. So obviously ensuring that the gadgets are available, the internet facilities available to everyone, trainings to the staff, to the caregivers, and the people who are immediately involved with people with disabilities. And also to ensure that the digital content that's coming up, even if we are able to create, like, say, 10 or 20 such chunks of contents that we are talking about, they have to be very, very relevant, and they have to be captioned, and make sure that the audio description is done in a manner that is actually understandable by people with disabilities. So hence the whole specialization and ensuring that it is to suit the needs of a person with disability. So these are some of the most relevant resources that we require. And of course, skilled staff is is like the crux of the entire thing, because you may have the finances, you may have the technology, but if you don't have the manpower to actually use it and do justice to it, I think then that's going to be half done. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess half the battle is won when you do have skill staff to implement all of this. And
yes,
if there's any way we can sort of even upskill volunteers or upskill like just members of civil society who would be interested in devoting their time and resources towards NGOs like yours, maybe that could be a potential solution. But I'm just bouncing ideas off my head right now, so excuse me. Deepti, would you like to come in and share some of the ways you all are re-strategizing your programs at Jevakate Foundation?
Hi. So, like I said earlier, we were completely on the ground, hands-on learning organization, right? So we did not have an online learning platform at all, and none of us did. It's when COVID struck that we had to completely restructure our planning. And as I shared earlier, we have done that keeping the age and the ability of our children in mind. We work with the entire spectrum. So we do have children with mild intellectual disability and all the way to profound. We have a zero reject policy. So we have children across IQs at Jevakate. When you go on to an online learning platform, actually, in a way, it sort of helped us, because here we could and because we were doing only 1.5 hours of online learning, we could group the children according to their abilities. So every teacher does sessions in 2 groups, and she picks and makes those groups dependent on the ability of the children. So we have only 5 children per session, and the grouping is done basis the ability of the child. So that's something that we've brought in. Of course, like I said, all the delivery channels have completely been restructured because they weren't there in the beginning. But having said that, there are bits and pieces we feel that we want to continue even after the pandemic is over, because we see some merit in that. So a lot of our children, especially children who have autism, actually have been showing quite a lot of engagement in an online platform, because it's one-on-one, it's in the comfort of their homes, there isn't any other sensory distraction around them. So maybe we are documenting our learnings and seeing what part of what we've done right now in terms of restructuring do we want to continue even when we get out of this situation. Similarly, for the monitoring and evaluation piece that we have put in place, because we wanted to track movement during this time, that's something that we want to continue even later. So those are the kind of changes that we've done in terms of restructuring, and hoping that we will be able to continue some of them even later.
Lovely. And my sense is that most of the programs and most of like the restructuring you all have done has kept in mind like the needs of every child. It's extremely customized, and it would be great if other NGOs could replicate this, but obviously not everyone does have the same sort of resources, but it's a really good takeaway, I feel. Deepti, would you like to share something about the kind of strategies that you all are using right now to restructure programs at J Foundation?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that we realized, in the month of March when we started brainstorming about what next, is that an MIS would be very much important to keep the program in line. There has to be a proper discipline in execution, because when you're executing an online program, you don't have the liberty of seeing someone physically. It's a whole virtual environment. So we designed a proper MIS where at the start of the week, the teachers already designed what would happen throughout the week. Every session that would be taken for the child was timed. What the session would entail was decided. So there was an advantage to doing this. One, that it gave prep time to the teachers. Second is that it made the parents ready for the week, because you're talking of mothers who also have to take care of their homes. They are homemakers most of the times, who have to manage their entire chores and then sit in the lecture, because it was very important that the parents sit in the session, since the parent was needed to guide the child. So we designed a system where the schedule was made much in advance to give a notice to the parent and the teacher to be ready. Then throughout the week, as the sessions progressed, we logged every detail as to what happened during the session, what were our successes and what were our failures. Because it is quite predictable that certain aspects are not going to work out. So if you already have a log of what is not working out for you, at the end of the week, you can easily review in terms of what can be adjusted in the next week. What are the sessions where the kids can be engaged easily? What are the sessions which are not fruitful for them? So there is no repetition of that syllabus unnecessarily. So that is something which we diligently did, and for the past few months, we are able to deliver 300 online sessions with the help of 6 teachers. And this is possible only because of the planning time that we took out. Even though the team had to, use separate time to plan, but I think that's a very important core aspect of a re-strategizing to online, that we spend good amount of time to plan ahead and then execute, rather than executing it haphazardly. That's one. Second is that we understood that the teachers and the parents have to be continuously educated and guided, and continuously engaged through online videos, through mentoring, through addressing their doubts. And that is what we kept a separate time to address in our schedule. If someone was facing trouble understanding a technological aspect, so we made sure that we used it. We also used a lot of content library that Connect for made. We used content that was available on the internet, because what happens is you save time. You can easily use content created which is available as open source and can be used, so that your team has time to design better content or other content that needs to be done. So we also tried to leverage and use as much resources as was already available, because I understand that if a lot of people are working towards the same cause, why not use each other's knowledge base? Why repeatedly be keen to always keep on giving so much time to design and redesign. So we tried to effectively use that. We also tried to effectively uh, pitch in interesting things in our content, like music sessions and art and craft sessions, which the kids can really enjoy and relate to, because it becomes quite difficult for the child to attend the sessions every day. So we made sure that the child did not attend it every day, but on alternate basis, so that there is a proper break between the sessions. So these are the smaller things which we thought of, so that there's continuity in terms of the child remaining engaged, and more so the parent remaining engaged with the child. It is more important that the parent remains involved, because without the parent there is no way you can execute this program. So it's a fine balance between you, the child, and the parent. So that's what we try to strike.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this kind of sort of fits in and ties in with my next component that we're going to walk through, which is retaining beneficiaries. And most of y'all have gone through like the strategies to sort of shift gears and move into like the new online learning models, etc. But a lot needs to also be done to make your beneficiaries stay in the programs that they are doing. And obviously monitoring and evaluation does help like give you an understanding of how well your programs are running and how well they've been received. But Deepti, if you would like to just take us through the kind of methods and like strategies you all are using to retain beneficiaries at Jai Vakil Foundation.
We basically, like, I think it started right from the very beginning, right? There were a lot of children who had wanted to go back to their villages because parents lost livelihoods. So our endeavor with them is throughout continuously maintaining contact, even if they cannot or are able to join online classes. Our teachers have found ways and means of ensuring that the material, whether it is a supplementary material or a worksheet that is taken a WhatsApp picture of and sent to the parent, we are trying to maintain a connect with the child irrespective of where the child's location is. Similarly, when a parent moves from the city of their base to another place, they sometimes go through a lot of emotional difficulties also because they've lost their livelihood. So keeping that in mind, there is a fair amount of counseling that goes in for the parent. Also, what we've done is that this change of scene sometimes leads to a lot of repercussions on the behavior patterns of the child. So if a child needs some sort of counseling through our therapists, we do have arranged for online therapy sessions also. So whether it is an occupational therapy or physical therapy or a psychologist that is needed, we are trying to provide for online sessions for the same. As far as our skill development center is concerned, where children would come in and be a part of our skill development center, there when we realized that the students were not coming in and they were not productively engaged at home, we decided to come up with a plan wherein we made packages of the kind of materials that would be creating at the center at Jai Vakil, we would pack that up and send it to the students' home. The students obviously know the process of making that, and there are videos that supplement it also. And they were gainfully engaged at home making the same thing. So that was something by way of which we ensured that there was less amount of learning loss that happened, and they were engaged and they were occupied and they were feeling that they were productive even in this time. So that is something that we are going to follow even in the times to come, wherein we will be continuously supplying the material to their houses so that they can be occupied and engaged from their comfort of their homes itself.
And I'm sure many must be thrilled with this idea of also like staying home and like continuing with the
Actually, so a quick story to tell here. So we sent in enough material for about 2 weeks, and we envisioned that the product would be completed in 2 weeks. But we were pleasantly surprised that almost all all students finished the work that was provided to them in half the amount of time that we had thought that they would do it. So I think they are looking forward to being busy also, because this has been a difficult time for them, and this lack of structure and routine has taken a toll. So that box that comes from Jai Vakil, I think, gives them a semblance of normalcy also.
Absolutely. And I hope you'll make more inclusion bands. I'm wearing one. So
you can watch this.
We get
Sure
them
thing.
to put their minds together and design some new bands. That would be perfect. Although I love your existing collection.
Sure. We'll keep you posted.
Yeah. Gitanjali, would you like to add anything to what Deepti said, or just go over what MAN is doing to sort of create a conducive work environment at home for especially able people as well as their caregivers?
Yes. So I think the most important aspect is obviously of what to do with your child, or how to, what to teach them, or how to keep them gainfully occupied. But how do you train them is the other important aspect, because you cannot just give an instruction and expect a person with special needs to actually go ahead and follow it. There is a way in which you communicate. There's a way in which you actually tell them how things need to be done. So that was one of the most important aspect that we figured that needs to be communicated very, very clearly to the parents. So that can be done purely by actually breaking down the tasks into simpler subtasks, which can then be, taught to the person with special needs in a structured manner. So unless the parent knows the structure, it's going to be very difficult for them to actually impart it to their child. So that bit which we call task analysis in special needs education, that was a key aspect of it, which we had to actually impart to each and every parent as a part of their training. And also to make sure that the content is very clear, which what we are providing access, the content has to be very, very clear and crisp, so that the parent can go ahead and execute it without any issues. So these are two important things that we kind of ensured that we were providing to have a conducive environment at home. And also that with regard to the our graduates who have been employed in the open employment setting. Now a lot of them have been employed in restaurants, in the hospitality sector. So now what happens when all of these sectors are kind of at a standstill at this moment, because restaurants are not really functional for daily operations, and so is the hospitality sector. So these are students, they're all at home, unsure of whether they were ever going to go back to work, because we don't know, whether they are going to be absorbed back into their workspace, and when is that going to happen, even if they do. So that insecurity led to a lot of mental health issues, because that depression that comes in, because the loss of their livelihood, the loss of the meaning that they have to their life. So all of this together, to make sure that this goes and is channelized well, we ensured that we backed it up with the counseling sessions and the mental health aspects of it, because that really helped them to cope with the situation better and ensure that they were spending this time meaningfully at home, and to ensure that there is no loss of skill. And also in a lot of cases, enhancement of skill has also happened. So yeah. This is
Yeah.
what we did.
That's great to hear. I think we all face the same struggles, whether we're able, whether we're especially able. I mean, this pandemic has literally opened opened the Pandora's box. So yeah, in that sense. Deepthi, would you like to come in and share some of the stuff y'all are doing at Ray Foundation to retain beneficiaries? I know that y'all are constantly like reviewing, doing weekly reviews on the content that y'all disseminate and the learnings that y'all disseminate. But in addition to that, is there any other sort of steps y'all are taking?
Right. So, right from the start of the program, I mean, not just during the pandemic, retaining beneficiaries is the biggest challenge, for a disability school, because the beneficiary that comes to your center is a low income beneficiary, which has other aspects, driving their choices in terms of coming to the school with the child or not. So this has always been an issue that we had to continually address. And our key understanding was, in particularly disability education, engaging fruitfully with the parent was the key. If the parent shared a proper bond with the teacher of the child, with the administrative staff of the center, the parent is going to feel comfortable. You're talking of a parent base who do not have the technical know-how. They have a special child, but they do not have the understanding of how to treat their child, how to go to a proper school, what is the proper steps for their child in the future. So you're talking of a set of people who need to feel comfortable with you, and that is something I feel a disability program should first strive to build. There should be a proper comfort zone for the parent to bring their child, where they can express their concerns. So that is the start of our thinking, for which we regularly have feedback calls with the parent. Our admin will call the parent every week just to hear them out, just to understand what they're feeling, what are their issues. Sometimes we feel that the issue is just pertaining to the child. It's not like that. If the mother is going through some other emotional issues at home, she's going to neglect this aspect of her life. So this kind of counseling, this kind of support given to the mother makes her feel empowered enough to continually engage at the program. So we try to do that by giving a weekly call from our administrator, who would just listen to what the parent has to say. Apart from that, it is important that you have engaging activities in terms of parent meetings. We try to have a parents group meeting where we address similar problems. What happens is you can connect with someone who's in the same boat as you. So having a self-help group of the parents helps a lot in bringing out their inner issues, that which they would feel uncomfortable to singularly bring up. They would definitely bring up in a group which understands them, which is in the same boat as them. So that is what we've tried to do to engage them with our program. The second thing we did was we tried to conduct these creative competitions every week, where the mother, father and the child participate. We didn't just keep it for child specific competitions. We tried to engage the parents as well, and we got a very good response, because the parents got a creative break, and it was a good chance for us to connect with the parents. So I feel the key to retaining children in the school is to retain the parents. If you're able to connect to the parent, to create awareness of why this is important for their child, they are going to continue to engage with you. And apart from that, understanding the economic situation, we gave a discount of all the fees for the months that the pandemic started, just to give them an economic help. We obviously charge nominal, but we thought of even levying that off, because it has just become such a huge economic crisis for every individual. Understanding that, we tried to give them the economic support too. So this is somewhere the parents should feel safe enough to engage their child, and once they feel that, it is a definite key to retaining the children into your program. So that is what my add-on would be.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, investing in parents means investing in children as well. It just creates that kind of environment that you need, and even for like upbringing, your parents are bringing the children up, so it definitely helps there. Um, so I think we can open the floor to the other participants now. If there's anything that y'all feel has really worked for your organization, which is currently not being done by any of the panelists, if you all would like to share that with the rest of the panelists and participants, that would be really nice. Or if you all have any thoughts, any suggestions that you all would like to share, you all can just unmute yourselves. It's a very small group now, so I think it will be manageable. Even if you all have any questions. I think earlier on we had a few questions that came in. One question that was brought up was, how do you ensure the safety of women with disability while enabling and mobilizing them? It isn't clear whether the person who's asked the question is referring exactly to livelihoods or just generally, but would any of the panelists like to take this up? Like Gitanjali, for example, if you had to send one of your beneficiaries out for work right now, how would you ensure their safety? Because I have heard several instances in the past of like many beneficiaries getting abused at their place of work while traveling, etc. So how do you sort of mitigate the risks involved out here?
Yeah. So I think I very rightly said people with disabilities are far more vulnerable than any of us for that matter. And the fact is that it is a competitive and a difficult world outside. So definitely making sure that first you need to make sure that before you send them out, there are certain readiness skills that you require, and to ensure that a person that you're sending out to work in in a setup, they are ready to actually deal with those situations. So first of all is about training them and ensuring that they know how to take care of themselves, and how to ensure that they do not really allow someone else to kind of abuse them in any form. So that is one thing where you train the student first before you make sure that before they actually step out. And the second most important thing is to sensitize the team that they are actually going to be working with. That is very important, because very often people may initially, when they kind of have this person with a special need in the team, they'll be very highly sympathetic and a lot of pity that comes in, but that doesn't really last long, because if you want this person to be absorbed just as any other member in that workspace, it's very important to count them as equals. So two important aspects: train the person with disability, and secondly, sensitize the team that they are working with. So yeah.
Absolutely. I hope that answers the question, whoever posed this question. Another question that we've got, and I think Divyanshu can answer this. What is the definition of inclusion? This is vital to chart out the road ahead in terms of how we should look at the specially abled population. So Divyanshu, could you please take this up?
There's only one line. There's only one line answer to this. There's a quote by Laura Vernon that says, "Diversity is about inviting someone to the dance, and inclusion is about inviting them to dance." So diversity is about asking them to come for the party. Inclusion is about asking them to dance.
Absolutely.
So
yeah,
inclusion essentially just means that no one is left behind. And a simple thing is, one of the things to do is also to ask yourself, do we have if our beneficiaries, who we work for, if we want to make a life better, this world better for persons with disability, do we have a person with disability on our board? Do we have a person with disability who's a success story on the board who represents the voice of the community?
Absolutely.
And that is
Everyone,
inclusion.
there's no equal representation out here on boards, in workforces, in schools, etc. So yeah, maybe if there was more equal representation, that would have really helped.
Absolutely. And we are organizations working for the community. So you should have the voice of the community on the board making the decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
totally
sure everyone
agree.
take a note of this.
Yeah, totally agree with Divyanshu, because honestly, forget the board. I think even people don't meet the minimum number of disabled people that you should have within an organization. So, yeah.
Is there a sort of law on this? On the
Public
number
sector, yes.
Yes.
Public sector. There's reservation in the public sector.
Okay.
In the
But,
private sector, it's nice to have. It's nice to have.
Of course. But I think many corporates do have like diversity and inclusion policies wherein they are mandated to have a certain number of people with disabilities in their team as well. Of course, we don't know how well it's being enforced and whether
4%. 4% of corporate India have persons with disability. Just 4%.
Just 4%. Yeah.
And a lot of them, because they have policies.
Because we do see so many talented individuals. I think when I worked with this organization earlier, we did have one boy from MUN. His name was Darren, fabulous. He was the office boy. And the way he would greet us every single morning, the way he functioned like at office, he completed all his work so efficiently, and it was such a joy to work with someone like that in this space. So I absolutely enjoyed that experience.
And a lot of companies do have the policy and then hire people with disability for eyewash.
Oh, okay.
Because, of course, because they want to show reports at the end of the year, right? So diversity is what you can count and measure. So to say that we have 4% staff with disability, we have 20% gender diversity, and 10% LGBTQ. That's diversity that can be counted in numbers. That looks great on the report. But the real question to ask is, how do they feel in that organization? Do they feel belonged? Do they feel they have the voice of dissent? Do they feel they have a voice? Do they feel their needs are being taken care of? That there are reasonable accommodations to succeed? Is there a succession planning? Is there leadership planning? These are the important questions to ask, but these don't get answered in their reports.
And I don't even think HR is that well equipped to even answer these questions, but it essentially comes down to being an HR piece and like building the culture of the organization as well. So,
So if I may say here, at Jai Vakil, we look at inclusion on three aspects. So it's inclusion at home, inclusion at society level, and inclusion in the community level. So sometimes the stigmatization actually begins very close. It begins at home. So there is a sensitization that needs right from the beginning, right? So that's how we sort of break down inclusion at Jai Vakil, wherein we work from home outwards, and we hope that we'll be able to make some difference because we are doing multiple advocacy pieces. We have children from other schools coming in talking about inclusion. We have an entire program called the Community Integration Program, wherein we ensure that our students go out and other students come in to our schools, so that there are platforms wherein we can showcase that there is potential for everybody, and even though each of us are different, we are all winners. So we are creating these platforms, and we hope that by the work that all the organizations are doing, we are able to reach our goal.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing that, Deepti. So I think we've gone over time out here, this overtime with 33 minutes, but I'd like to thank you all so much for taking out the time today and participating in this roundtable. I hope it's been of value to all of y'all. I don't know if y'all have sort of taken away from each other through cross learnings and through like the various suggestions y'all have made and recommendations. But I feel like we definitely should take this conversation forward and have a more detailed and in-depth conversation on this, and it should never stop. This conversation should always be ongoing to actually see the kind of change that we want to see. But we will be sharing a feedback form with all of y'all. If y'all can put in your feedback, maybe we can sort of implement it to make the session better for the next time. But thank you so much, both the Deeptis.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so much, Kritika, for hosting this.
Yeah,
It was wonderful.
I've absolutely loved listening to everything that y'all are doing, and y'all have really come up with remarkable solutions to many of the problems. The biggest takeaway for me from this session out here is that I can apply your learnings to even normal education focused NGOs, and they would come in handy. So before we did this roundtable, we had done a roundtable for only education focused NGOs. That was sometime in early July. So I'm assuming people were still like, getting their feet wet and like exploring options and re-strategizing. But now, since we've spent enough time in this mode, obviously y'all are at a more advanced level. So I feel advanced stage of like implementing processes and systems, etc. So I'm definitely going to share your learnings, the learnings from here and the takeaways from here